Hi, everybody. Welcome to Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you for joining us. Let's get a quick take on the state of Colorado's health exchange, which has the fourth highest number of participants among the 15 states who have state-run exchanges. Patty Cahoon from Westward, does the success, or at least the perceived success, of the Colorado exchange change the Obamacare conversation in Colorado?
Oh, not at this table, I don't think. We'll keep chatting about it till November. It's going to depend a lot on how people's insurance works. So the fact that they've gotten the sign up is impressive. With Amy Stevens out of the race now, it might have made a little bit of difference for her, but it's going to be how it's playing nationally, how people are campaigning against it, whether we assume it's going to be Cory Gardner is really able to come up with good, strong ads that attack it on a national basis and gets at Udall from there. So no matter what, people will be making plenty of hay on this topic.
David Kolper from DU Law School and the Independence Institute. Fourth highest out of the 15, is that good or bad news for Cory Gardner?
Well, it's relatively good news. But when Snow White met the seven dwarfs, there was going to be one who was taller than the other, but that doesn't mean that any of them were tall. So, yeah, compared to the complete fiasco in Hawaii or Oregon or Maryland, where these things have been catastrophes that people can't even sign up for when they want to, the Colorado Exchange is certainly functioning much better. But as Patty said, it goes back to the product that people are getting. And the product that people are getting is you got kicked off of the insurance that you wanted and forced to buy something that's more expensive with worse coverage. But Colorado is doing a better job of signing people up for that than Maryland is.
Eric Sonderman from SE2. It's great to have you back. I haven't had you on for a few weeks.
Good to be back.
I don't know how you follow the whole dopey, sleepy, sneezy doc metaphor, but give it your best shot.
Well, I was going to say we just watched the Olympics, and fourth place doesn't even get you on the podium. Now, David is right. It's better than some other states with truly awful experiences. I think it really depends. It's too soon to tell. It depends on who the people signing up are. It's not just a numbers game, it's a demographics game. Are they new customers, or are they just replacing old policies? Are we really insuring the uninsured, in other words? Secondly, what are the demographics? Are they young, or does the thing skew very old, in which case then you worry about a death spiral, because the whole predicate behind Obamacare is enrolling the young to then subsidize those who are older. Katie Kerwin-McCrimmon with Health Solutions did a really strong article this week. It's an online publication, Health Solutions, that I'd recommend, and it talked about how the management at the Colorado Exchange is proposing a 21% fee increase. Now, fortunately, the board of that exchange voted it down, but it's sort of inverse logic. If you're having problem with demand, the last thing you do is raise price, but that's what they were proposing to do with the 21% fee increase. Only in this weird world of healthcare is something like that even considered or discussed.
Penn Tate, from attorney with Greenberg Traurig, also a longtime state lawmaker. What did you make of the announcement this week?
You know, I think it's interesting. I think as we look at what's happening with the exchange in Colorado, I think it plays differently in some of the races. You may criticize Obamacare, but part of what Colorado's experience shows is it makes a big difference if you care more about insuring people and getting coverage than trying to make political points, number one. Number two, I think anyone who is critical of the Obamacare and its implementation in Colorado run squarely in opposition to the business community, which in Colorado decided, if we're going to do it, let's do it right, let's put it in place, and let's make it work. And so I don't think it matters which cohort of the population is signing up. The reality is a lot of people are signing up one way or another. And so I think that's something you've got to take into consideration as you talk about the whole program.
The Republican National Committee announced this week that it will be adding 14 new staffers and opening 12 offices in Colorado this year. GOP party officials said that the increased investment is due to both the high-profile candidate running for U.S. Senate and the growing profile of the GOP gubernatorial primary. Patty, this seemed like a decent investment into ground game from the Republicans after that really being the game plan of the Democrats for so long. What did you make of the announcement?
Well, I think it's a smart move for the Republicans if they really want to win here. And as we know, it does look like they've got a shot with Udall. It's hard to tell really what's going to happen depending with the Republicans and how they're going to really help them out during the primary. I'm not sure. I can't wait to see Governor Hickenlooper use this as an example of how he's creating jobs here and how he's improving the economy. But clearly, this is a win for Colorado that we're bringing all these jobs in. It's going to be fun for us to watch. You know, I don't think it's just because the Republicans want to be able to buy pot. I think they really are thinking they're going to have a shot at winning a couple important seats here. And so we welcome them. Maybe it means we've got a shot at the Republican National Convention, too, in 2016, which would be a blast.
That's true. David, is this a national endorsement of Cory Gardner? I mean, then they said a top-tier candidate. That obviously, they were saying that the candidates beforehand weren't top-tier. Is this a national endorsement?
Yeah, yes, it is. And I think one of the reasons Cory Gardner got into the race was because the national endorsers came to him and said, you're going to have a lot of support very early on. And I think the Republicans are also being less stupid than usual because one of the very important reasons that Obama carried the state in 2012 was his field operation was so much better than Romney's. The Romney thing was we'll have a few places and some large room and maybe on a good day we'll have 100 volunteers in there. And Obama from very early on had many field offices all over the state, and that was a crucial, smart, well-planned advantage for him. So the Republicans here may be learning from their past defeats and failures.
Eric, that might be hard for now, at least our friend John Caldera to believe that Republicans are learning from past mistakes. What do you think?
I guess 2 words to start with: buckle up. I mean, this is going to be a wild ride. I think the Republican National Committee investment here is just symptomatic of that. Colorado has moved front and center on a lot of national equations here. I haven't been on the show, as you indicated, for a few weeks, and a lot has changed between Bob O'Prey getting in the race, which was a minor ripple, Cory Gardner getting in the race, which was a potential, we'll see, but a potential game changer. But my take, particularly on the Gardner race, is this is going to be the acid test for Colorado of whether we have become a blue state, maybe not bright blue, but a reliably blue state, or whether we're still purple. The Republicans are not going to find a better candidate than Cory Gardner, and they're not going to find a better year than 2014. And if they cannot make it work with this candidate in this environment, then you start scratching your head and saying, are they really viable, or have we turned some shade of periwinkle blue, if you'll go there? So I think that's what's really being considered here. The big news this week, I mean, it was an awful week for Democrats nationally. It was an awful week for the Obama White House, and the main one being the congressional race in Florida Congressional District 13, where the Democrats would have seemed to have all the advantages. They had a more well-known candidate, a top-tier candidate. The Republican candidate was a lobbyist who's easy to tar as a lobbyist. It was a district Barack Obama carried twice. The Democrats had superior money, and still the Republican won that special election by 2 points. And that was just a further wake-up call as to what kind of year might be in store here. Obviously, we have 8 months to go, but it is looking like it is a very tough year to be a Democratic incumbent.
Penn, the announcement from the Republican National Committee made pretty big headlines, but a ground game has been the Democrats' game plan for a long time, and this is 2004, right? We're talking at least in Colorado. How do you think Democrats will respond to the news?
I think Democrats will probably respond first by saying, to quote David, it's about time they weren't so stupid and woke up and figured out how you win a race in Colorado. But the more important thing is, I think, to Eric's point, this is all the chips in the middle of the table for the Republican Party. I think since 98, 2000, this state has been vacillating between blue and purple for a while, and I think the Republican Party realizes we've got to take back some ground or it's going to be a long time. That they've had a thin bench for years. They've struggled on social issues and some other sort of extreme issues, and it seems to them they have a convergence. I don't know if Bob O'Prey gets them there, but I think they probably believe with Cory Gardner stepping into the U.S. Senate race, there's a convergence of factors which says we got to go all in now and see if we can stem the tide in Colorado. Because if we can't do it this year with this candidate and then commit to a ground game, we aren't going to be able to do anything for some time to come. So it's going to be interesting to watch how these campaigns play out. Eric's right, buckle up, because I think it's going to get ugly fast because the stakes are so high.
Interesting to watch. Probably one of the underestimated understatements that we've had at this table for a long time. A Denver District Court judge ruled this week that a decision by the state's Ethics Commission against Secretary of State Scott Gessler should stand. At issue was a complaint that Gessler used state funds for a trip in 2012. Meanwhile, a hearing this week at the Ethics Commission included comparisons of the current complaint filed against Governor John Hickenlooper with Gessler's. David, is this finally time where Gessler should pay the fine, be done with it, or should he keep fighting since he's already fought this long?
Since he's running for governor, he absolutely has to keep on fighting, even if he thinks he's only got a 2% chance of winning in the Court of Appeals. Because if it ends, however it ends, if the verdict is Gessler violated ethics laws, that would be a powerful ad to use against him. And of course, most people would never get down to the genuine triviality of the complaint, which is he went to a lawyers' conference, since he's a lawyer, and then attended the Republican National Convention, which was in the same state. So I think a lot of these ethics complaints on both directions, so much of it really is disconnected from genuine ethics and proper behavior, and it's all this gotcha over little rules, and it's maybe that's how you have to have the checks and balances work, is you have these organizations with actually no ethics themselves, like Colorado Ethics Watch, whose job is to file complaints, many of them bogus, against the other side, and then there's efforts to create, the antimatter version of that to file complaints against Democrats. But it's really, it trivializes ethics, and I think in the long run brings down ethics in Colorado, that ethics issues and complaints are not actually about genuinely unethical behavior, but just about nitpicking on hyper-technical stuff.
Eric, if you're advising Scott Gessler at this point, where he's at in this complaint process, what do you tell him?
I half agree with David, and halfway I'll go a separate path. I do totally agree that this is gotcha ethics. It's very partisan. Gotcha is the right word here. Secondly, that we're talking relatively small stakes complaints, trivial if you want to use that word. In terms of the ads that can be used against Scott Gessler, trust me, those ads are already cut, or they're at least conceived and written and ready to go, whether it's in the primary process by other Republican candidates, or if Scott survives the primary and wins that nomination, then obviously you can expect the governor to play that card when the time comes. So I almost don't think it matters what course Scott picks here. The ads are cut, the ads are going to run. I think David's point may have some validity that you have to keep fighting just for the cosmetics of fighting and asserting your innocence, but the ads are going to run in either event. My own, looking into the future, what if we do end up with a Scott Gessler, John Hickenlooper race? Maybe they can just take the state plane around the state together to various campaign appearances, or just have the state pay for both of their campaigning, since they're both subject to these kinds of complaints.
Penn, I don't think it's going to include a mutual tour of the state. The idea of bringing up Hickenlooper's complaint, which when you get into the material of it, is quite different, but the fact that he has an ethics complaint against him, Gessler has one rolling, was that a partisan attempt about just saying, hey, Hickenlooper and Gessler are the same, or is it more about that any complaint around this ethics commission is silly and they all should be thrown out?
I think it's two things. I think with the ethics commission, I think they've sort of missed their fundamental mission. I think in the minds of most people, when you think of ethics and elected officials, you want to know if somebody's vote is getting bought, if someone is taking money or bribes or favors to shift policy in a particular direction. Most voters don't care that Scott Gessler, as a lawyer, got money, went to a lawyers' convention, and then showed up at the RNC. And I've said before, I thought the complaint against him was trivial and missed the point. But Scott's in an awkward situation now. I think he's got to fight this. I think he can't concede it because the political ads are cut. And the last thing he wants is the ad that says ethics complaint, and he admitted he was guilty. So he's got to keep fighting at this point. But secondly, if he does it correctly, I think he can elevate the conversation and say, as a policy matter, is this really what Colorado people mean by ethics? I think I complied with the rules that are in effect. This is why, but I'm a statewide elected official. I happen to be a Republican. I happen to be a lawyer. And everything I did was, I would argue, consistent with and in furtherance of the elected office that the people of Colorado put me in. Is this really what you want to be concerned about? I think if he tries to craft the argument in that fashion, people will look at all of this ethics complaint stuff in a very different way.
Patty, can the honey badger turn this to his advantage?
I think he probably can. We've talked about it at this table. It's not only a trivial complaint, but if you get the whole story, he came back early because there were very ugly threats made against his family. He can actually even get some sympathy too. The fact that the Hickenlooper argument came up at the same time is great timing for him. But it does show literally that Amendment 41 is the law of unintended consequences, that we are spending so much time on these kinds of arguments. It's being used as a tool for one party to go after the other party. In this case, it's equal time at least, when in fact there are so many other issues we would really like to be looking into. Transparency, where laws are being made, and not just at the state level, but at municipal levels, at county levels, school board levels, that the people have a right to know. These fights look petty, and I think actually Hickenlooper won't make it a campaign issue because it is too small, and he's had a couple complaints filed against him. It depends really on whether the 527 groups and others decide to make a fight with it. But I think both Hickenlooper and Gessler in this case can argue their cases very well.
State officials announced this week that over $2 million of tax revenue was collected in January from the sale of recreational pot. On Wednesday, Fox 31 reported that lawmakers on the Joint Budget Committee, no pun intended, received important legal counsel this week. The advisory said that if the state collects more than $67 million in pot taxes, the excess tax revenue will be subject to TABOR and may need to go back to voters. Eric, this seemed like a bombshell. Like, wait a second, everyone's thrilled about tax revenue or pot tax revenue at the state capitol. Then now let's go back to the voters. Both the hatred for TABOR at the state capitol and the love of it, I think, around the state changed overnight. What do you think?
I thought it was a very interesting story. I personally can't get to math that up in my own head, and maybe somebody else here can help me add it up. But if we collected $2 million in January, I mean, 2 million times 12 is 24 million. Maybe it's growing a little bit, but even if 24 million becomes 27 or 30, it doesn't conflict with that $67 million cap, which would trigger possible refunds. But I know you have respectable, responsible people on the Joint Budget Committee, both sides of the aisle. I'm thinking of Crisanta Duran, Sherry Giroux, and others who are both saying that there is a risk of bumping up against this limit. And then you get, Patty used the phrase in response to the last question of unintended consequences. It applies here as well of, completely unintended consequence of what the voters did by a huge margin in imposing these pot taxes. And does it trigger refunds? And then all the corollary questions. Who gets the refunds? Is it just people who paid the tax? Is it every taxpayer? How is that distributed? And we're talking about, at least according to Fox 31, maybe an $8 per person per taxpayer kind of refund. And you wonder how much it's going to cost to process those refunds. You probably spend it near as much as the value of the refund just to pay the processing costs.
Penn, you're a former state lawmaker. If you were on the Joint Budget Committee and received this news, how would you react?
Well, having been on the Joint Budget Committee before, I'd jump for joy. Then I'd sit down and say, oh, man, what are we going to do? Historically, what the state has done is when you get in a TABOR situation, you do refund it as a state sales tax because those proceeds are exempt from federal taxation for the individuals that receive them. So that's what's going to happen. Secondly, it's going to be fascinating to see those people who are opposed to the legalization of pot, what they do when they're entitled to this $8 refund, if they're going to refuse it on moral grounds or if they're going to keep the money. My guess is if the JBC is saying they're concerned about this, what they're probably looking at is actual proceeds, as Eric explained, but some sort of growth projection as more and more of these shops are anticipated to come online. So they're probably looking at licensing applications and everything else, conversion applications, and anticipating this is a growing market and this is a likelihood of occurring. It is a fascinating situation, and I'm sure one we never expected to be in.
Well, Patty, Penn's right. I don't think a lot of people were talking about TABOR implications when we were talking about regulating pot last year. What did you think about the announcement?
what was fascinating, but what's really unknown is how much we're going to collect on pot. I mean, January, there were only maybe a quarter of the number of recreational stores that'll finally be open this year. But on the other hand, there were lines around the block, which you're not seeing now. So is it where people, how much more pot can really be sold in Colorado? I mean, at a certain point, we're going to be comatose in this town if it goes up 4 times from where we were in January. And I do think, although pot tourism is certainly going to be, we'll see a lot of it this summer, I don't know if that's going to be enough to really bump us over the edge. I think we're going to come very close, but whoever thought we would talk about pot and Tabor at the same time? I mean, are we going to have Douglas Bruce coming out to campaign? I don't know. Would he campaign for pot, against pot? It's kind of hard to know, but it's a delicious thought to think
It is,
contemplate.
yeah, it is absolutely, like you said, delicious to think about. David, does this change the conversation about Tabor? I mean, there's the lawsuit going, and now there's a whole different pot angle. Where are you at on it?
Well, both of these are things where Colorado's one of the great progressive reforms in the early 20th century is really working well, where the people can make the laws when the politicians of the statists of both parties don't want to do things. So now we have a fairer system, so the people have some control over how much taxes they pay. And they also said, no, it's time to end this criminal war on marijuana users. Everybody in the state will get a marijuana tax cut, perhaps, if it goes well enough. And I think that to answer Eric's question, no, you don't have to refund the excess revenues to the people who brought them in. So the people who don't use pot are going to be free riders. And I think what Penn was saying was the simplest way to do it is on the state income tax. You can just give people put that refund into the state income tax that's calculated, and then the process, there's no separate processing costs.
I kind of like the idea of getting my own little munchie check, but either way is fine.
Or
It's
just,
fine.
hand out edible gummy bears.
That's
at the corner.
true. Yeah, little edibles, whatever it's going to be. We can get creative. Let's get a quick take on this last topic. Denver police were involved in 11 shootings in 2013. Denver's independent police monitor suggested this week that some of the shootings could have ended differently if the officers had additional training on how to recognize mental health illnesses. Deputy Chief Robert White has ordered a review of the shootings to see if changes in instruction and policy should be made. Penn, what do you think?
Well, first, let me applaud the independent monitor, because I think sometimes the job, that position requires that you monitor, look, and comment. You don't always have to be right. You need to elevate the conversation and raise some issues. And in many of these cases, the monitor's office has raised the right issues. There are problems that we just saw on TV in the last 48 hours. The videotape of this woman whose head is getting slammed against the wall a couple times, you know, and it kind of reminds me harkens back to Rodney King, where he was laying on the ground getting kicked, and people decided he had resisted arrest. I guess with a foot in your back, you're resisting arrest. But this is the right thing to do. The monitor should continue to press these things. The chief needs to respond and take a look at appropriate discipline, and on the front end, appropriate training, because in the best of all worlds, these things should never happen in the first place. And well-trained officers who are, and put the peer pressure in places where you want to be.
Patty, was it the right response?
It was an excellent response. Look at it. We're 10 years from when Paul Childs was shot. And at that time, you know, a mentally unbalanced kid, at that time there was talk about the DPD had to deal with this. They actually brought someone on staff to give more mental health advisement, and all that was dropped by the wayside. So it's absolutely time for more training. If they can spend 9 days training people how to find pot-addicted drivers, they can certainly deal with mental health issues.
David, your quick take.
I think I don't think any of the famous incidents that have been reported show that the Denver police officer involved actually did anything wrong, and I think the whole Paul Childs thing was very unfair in how the police officer was portrayed as a bad guy in a dangerous situation where you have a large man with an uplifted knife. Training is good. Denver Police Department has had training in dealing with people with mental disabilities. Refresher training, more training, that's fine, but I would not suggest that there's been any particular incident where the police officer actually did the wrong thing under the circumstances.
Eric, wrap it up for us.
I don't have a ton to add, Dominic. I think it's been said. I really agree with Penn on both scores. One, the importance of training. Others have said the same thing as well. And secondly, the importance of the monitor and the role of the monitor as a, creating a dynamic tension and asking important questions. The Channel 4 video, our friend Brian Moss last night, Penn referenced the incident of the woman with her head beat against the wall, is disturbing stuff.
Let's get to the easiest part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. Patty, start us off.
Governor Hickenlooper was looking at a bill he might be able to veto this year. I have to say, the one that's going through to change the Eisenhower Tunnel to Veterans Tunnel, there's political correctness. But if you remember who created the interstate highway system, I don't think we need to, and I think Eisenhower was a vet too. I don't think we need to wipe his name off.
Last time I checked, a name not offensive to veterans. David, your Disgrace of
And
the
so
Week.
remember the other bore, which is the Edwin C. Johnson Memorial Tunnel, and he was a great Coloradan also. Sarah Palin just is continuing disgrace for her stupidity. I just remind that in 2008, in the vice presidential debate, she said that Obama's weakness might lead Russia to invade Ukraine. That would be a violation of the 1994 treaty that Russia signed. How stupid can somebody be?
Sarcasm here? Wait a second. Eric, go ahead.
I like both of those. Some New York politicians, there was a very sad incident in Harlem this week, that building exploding. But the rhetoric got way over the top. Mayor de Blasio, who's not off to a terribly auspicious start, called it a quote-unquote tragedy of the worst kind. First of all, I don't know of any other kind of tragedy than the worst kind. Secondly, it just defies recent historic memory. You had Charlie Rangel called it Harlem's 9/11. Thought it was completely over the top here.
That floored me. I'm with you 1,000% on that, Eric. Penn, go ahead.
General Motors, 303 deaths over 10 years as a result of known defects in vehicles, and you take money from the public to help bail you out. They have some explaining to do.
Exactly. Very quickly, say something nice.
We just marked 6 months since the horrible floods. Good work by the Department of Transportation again and the state, and good luck to the survivors.
President Obama far outperforming anything President Romney might have done in getting rid of Obamacare. He's postponed the individual mandate penalty for 2 years and also postponed the small business mandate.
Eric?
David wins the sarcasm award here. A friend of mine, Stacy Rader, who I know, she's the communications director at the League of Charter Schools, was a woman on her way to work a few days ago who was T-boned by the crazy 100-mile driver leading police on that wild chase throughout the metro area. Fortunately for Stacy, she's okay in her own way. She brought an end to that because then he got out of his car and they chased him down a minute later. Also the state trooper who was very seriously injured.
You're here. Penn?
To the Denver water employees who've been recognized by the community for volunteering to help flood victims and staying around up in the canyons and working overtime to restore roads and services, thank you for all of your work you did for Coloradans.
That's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching. Good night.